everybody. Well, why don't we get started? I assume Mike will be on shortly and hopefully Steve G as well. So I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is the Sherborn Advisory Committee meeting for February 8th, 2023. And it's 7:04. Hoping to get a volunteer who would take minutes. Thought we'd give Natalie a break since she's done that for a number of weeks in a row. Somebody who'd be willing to take that on tonight.
Yeah, I can do it.
Great. Thank you, Wasim. That's great. Just a second here. I'm just getting my notes going here. Okay, let me just read the agenda and then we'll get going. So we'll do the usual follow-up items, starting with the liaison reports. I've got a bunch of things I think some other people do as well. For then our current meeting items, I'll just highlight a few numbers out of the latest version of the budget model, and thanks to Deb for getting that pulled together. And then for budget review, we'll plan is to start with police, then do fire and ambulance, debt service, OPEB and benefits. Debt service, Heidi Doyle had a family emergency and couldn't be here. So we'll see how far we get with that and what questions there are. Maybe we can collect questions to pass on to her if there are any questions. And then Jane and Mike are gonna provide a bit of kind of background and setup for next week's schools meeting. And then we'll approve minutes and should adjourn after that. Does anybody have any changes to the agenda? Okay, hearing none, we'll take, I guess we're supposed to vote to approve the agenda, so let's do that. So motion to approve the agenda as written and read.
I second.
Perfect. All right, so quick roll call. Nora?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Steve?
Aye.
Jane?
Aye.
Natalie?
Aye.
Wasim?
Aye.
And I'm an aye as well, so that gets us 7-0 for the agenda. Perfect. I'll just mention again that for items on the agenda, we can flip the order if necessary. So I mentioned the order that's on the agenda. That was my intention for how we proceed. But if somebody has a conflict or time issue and wants to switch that, certainly open to considering that. All right, so why don't we go on to liaison reports? I've got a bunch of things to mention. Why don't I start with those and then we can just bounce around, because I think there are some others that other people wanted to talk about. One quick follow-up from last week, when I think we talked about consolidation of phones and information technology and which departments had done that or hadn't done that. So I think I had a bit of a misunderstanding about that. I checked in with Klaus this week, and excuse me, the plan had been to consolidate landline phones to get that all consolidated on the town's phone system. There really never was a plan to consolidate cell phones all into the IT budget. I gather that's individual enough across departments and specific. So Klaus thought that that wasn't something they had been trying to do. Didn't really make sense to do that. And on the security on phones, apparently the phones really only connect to the town through Wi-Fi and email through the Microsoft 365 connections. And while the phones don't have specific security software on them, each of the paths through which they're connecting do, so that Klaus felt pretty confident that there was a reasonable level of security, although, always open to being reevaluated in the future. Let's see, just a reminder, I went to the planning board meeting last night where they kind of teed up the issue of large scale ground mounted solar. Didn't have any discussion last night. That's going to happen on February 21st. It's one of the warrant articles that I expect we'll be talking about when we get to those warrant article meetings on March 8th, and then again at the public hearing. I think Steve and I, the last I heard, Steve and I are going to be there on the 21st on Zoom. space for a couple more. If there's a lot of interest, we'll have to figure out about posting a meeting or whatever. So please let me know if you are planning on joining in for that. Also, still following up, the prior discussion about getting some numbers on full-time equivalent employees. I think that's close, still getting finished off. And I think before long, there'll be some numbers to be shared around on that. And I think the last, let's see, the next thing I have, there was a question about balances in the equipment surplus revolving fund. So Deb tracked down those balances for us. I came to roughly 12,000 in the police portion, 9,500 in the fire portion, and about 5,000 in the DPW portion. So that adds up to 26.5. And I'm just going to put this out there. We probably need to actually put this on the agenda if we're going to get into a major discussion about it. The limit for that revolving fund had been 85K. I think Jeremy had come back with a proposal that it be 50K. So I just wanted to pass that on to everybody for information. And that really feeds into my last item, which if there are items like that or others where anyone on advisory has concerns or is feeling like we need to have more of a conversation, or where you're thinking, I'm not going to be okay with that budget request, and kind of thinking public hearing, probably going to vote against that. It'd be really helpful for me to know that, so that if we do need to schedule and tee up any additional discussion of some of these items, that we can do that while we still have time. I've got a couple in my mind that I think fit that category, but if there are others, please let me know. Okay, so that was it for me. I know Deb had something she wanted to share, so let me turn it over to Deb, and then we'll just open it up for anybody else. You are muted, Deb.
Yep, I'm sorry about that. I'm pretty excited to share this. I just got a call right when I was leaving the office, actually, from our Maya representative, and she said that our increase is going to be 1% next year, opposed to the 9% that we currently have in the budget. So,
and that's for health insurance?
That's for health insurance, yeah. So it should be, from where we are in the budget right now, it'll probably be a savings about $120,000 to $130,000 from where we are in the budget right now.
Amazing. That's amazing.
She sent an email earlier this month, and they have a big meeting, and she came back and she said that all of their towns would be receiving a rate of increase of anywhere between 1% and 10%, and the average falling at 5%, and she would let us know later in the month where we stood. And then when I talked to her today, she said we had the minimum of 1%. So that was really good news.
Wow. Do we know why it's so low?
Well, it's really based on our history. And so I think we've had some personnel changes, and we really haven't had a whole lot of claims in the last year and a half, something like that. So it went way down.
So
great.
That's the kind of news we like. Yeah,
exactly. So I'm going to have to take a closer look at our actuals right now to make sure our actuals are running pretty close to budget. But on a quick look, it looks like we're right on budget for this year. So 1% should be pretty good.
Yeah. Thanks. That is great. So who else with liaison reports? Steve, go ahead.
I have not technically a liaison report, but I did just want to let everybody know that I am officially running for select board. That's my wife laughing at me in the background, if you can hear that. But yes, I will be I will be at the town caucus on I don't remember what date. March 8th, I think.
I think it's March 2nd. I think it's March 2nd. At least the town calendar says March 2nd.
Yeah. And as far as the caucus is aware, I'm the only, I think, assuming Paul also runs, it's probably just going to be Paul and me running for the two spots. So it's Probably not going to be contested. But just in case you wonder why now, suddenly I am in favor of all the power and all the money going to the select board, that's why.
All right.
Good for you, Steve.
Yeah. Yeah, probably not the time or place for this, but I think that's great. I think it's terrific. Okay, thanks for letting everybody know. Helpful for everybody to have that background as we get closer to the town caucus. Anybody else with things to pass along? Jeremy or anybody else who has Peter, you want to tell us about capital budget last night or any other topics?
Yes. I'm just reading through the minutes here to make sure. We did some approvals, and the fire department, police department, Sherborn schools, and regional schools, their requests were approved. And we had an engaging discussion about the DPW buildings with outlining some broad guiding principles. And Jeremy was an active participant and is going to be a guest next week after conferring internally with his team.
All right, thanks. Sounds like some progress was made. Good, thanks, Peter. Okay, anybody else with anything to share? Okay. So let's go on to budget review. As I mentioned, I'm just going to take a minute and a half to share the latest version of the budget model. This version, it doesn't include the news that Deb just shared with us. It also doesn't include the latest numbers on debt service. So, you know, it's not absolutely 100% up to date, but it's more up to date than anything we've looked at so far. And should be visible in just a second. Is that coming through? Great. Okay. So I sent it around to everybody, so everybody has a version to take a look at, analyze, play with in any way you want. I was just going to highlight a few numbers. So I'm on the summary page at the top, and I'm just focusing down on the line for the tax levy. And last year, this year, fiscal 23, you know, we're running at a number a little over 6. And it currently looks like for fiscal 24, we're in that range or a little bit higher. So what does that 6% increase in tax levy mean? Well, jumping down a little bit, in terms of the tax rate, that's in the column here for FY24. Is my cursor showing up as I'm moving my cursor up and down? Yeah, okay. In this column, tax rate on these numbers, the tax rate would not change so much. And that's because given the lags in how property prices get in and assessed values get in, given a plausible estimate of what those lag values will indicate for assessments for fiscal 24, assessments probably rising about in line with what those tax levy numbers are, what that tax levy increase is. So not likely huge change in the tax rate. But let me just jump down to the tax recap analysis tab. And if you look down at the bottom, this shows average house values in Sherborn, average assessed values, and an average tax bill. So while the tax rate wouldn't be going up so much next year, on these numbers, it looks like after about $1,000 increase in the average tax bill in town, next year would be something similar to that, another 1,000-ish plus increase in the tax rate, in the tax bill for the kind of the average valued home in town. So just a few kind of bottom line numbers to highlight, sort of where we're landing and how things are coming out. Of course, an important part of that is what's happening with the school budget, big part of the overall budget, some big increases there. And Jane and Mike are going to give us a preview of that after we get through other budget reviews. Okay, happy to talk about any more of that. I wasn't really intending to have a discussion, but since I only sent that out an hour or so, just wanted to point everyone to a few key numbers in the budget model. And unless somebody has more to add on that, let's just proceed on with budget review. And Chief Galvin, if you are ready to go, that'd be great. I'm happy to share your budget if that would be helpful, or if you want to share, that's fine too.
That would work well.
Okay, great. Give me just a second and I will get it.
So just to start, I think you can, you've all seen that there was a reduction in the police budget this year, or proposed for next year. I don't think that was unexpected with our transition to regionalization and what we kind of had looked at and thought about for cuts in the overtime budget. So if we kind of start at the top with the salaries, really what you see in increases along those lines are all contractual and related to the contracts, with really the big decrease coming in the overtime line. We'd increased what was budgeted because of some of the previous year actuals from I think our budget for FY22 had been 190. We kind of looked at what the actuals were going to be for this year, planning for the transition to the regional, and we upped it to 267. Looking at next year and forecasting it based on the discussions we had last year and what thoughts were, and I think your expectations were, we've significantly reduced that number to something that I think we're going to be more than manageable. And we'll continue to keep an eye on it. A lot of it, again, and from the past, depends on our staffing levels, which we are in very good shape now compared to some of the previous years. And then just some other things to note that are in our regular salaries line. That includes the lieutenant salary. That's not set for next year yet. We're in the process. A new lieutenant was selected to replace Dave Bento, and that contract negotiation is underway. So there could be a slight difference in that as we move forward. But I think as we look overall at salaries with a 5% reduction, we are in good shape, and we kind of went as planned for this year. Where we do see some changes on the expense lines, and there is an increase in the expense lines. And as you can see, I did some highlighting on the budget in combining some lines. When I presented last year, I was still learning a lot of the budget. I'd only been here a few months, and just looking throughout the history, the way these three different groups, where I've grouped each one of them into an independent line, one single line, there had been so much crossover throughout the years. With equipment repairs and repair of equipment. One year things were paid out of equipment repairs. The next year they were paid out of repairs of equipment. There was really no rhyme or reason to some of it. It just made sense to combine those into one line. There's a slight increase there when you look at what the combination of lines would have been had we combined it this year. And that really relates to some of our body camera equipment. We're at end of life of our body cameras. And we need to do some maintenance before we enter into a new contract. When I spoke and presented at Capital, I put a number out there for next year, what it possibly could cost over 5 years to replace our body cameras. I'm trying to avoid that number and looking at any way to do that. It was potentially up to $100,000, really because of data storage. It wouldn't all be capital expense. But I've already applied for one $34,000 federal grant. And I'm working actually with the dispatch center now. Because of some of the new technology, it makes it available to apply under state 911 funding for some of the equipment. So we're gonna work on that. So hopefully I don't come back to you with anything next year. But it did increase our repairs and maintenance to have to purchase new batteries and things like that for some of our older equipment. Where the real increases are in that kind of those information system lines. There had been 3 lines, really, we've been working out of 2 and a lot of crossover. So there were some things that were removed from those lines that went to the IT budget. We had been paying for some software or data backup ever since the breach here, though that bill through Carbonite has been transferred to the IT budget. That actually significantly increased this year because of the amount of data the town's now backing up. And also all of our Outlook accounts through Liftoff are being transitioned into the IT budget. That was somewhere of around, I want to say $4,000 to $6,000. I'm not sure what the Carbonite would come out to for next year. But then we had some increases. And where is that? Sorry. Looking at that, we took on our reverse 911, our code risk grid system from the select board. And from what the information they provided me, we're looking at an 8 to 10% increase in that cost for next year. We also have some speed monitoring equipment, the signboard. We had a grant this year. Addie Mae was looking at the highway was looking at getting a new speed board. We were actually able to, through a state grant, get the speed board, but there's some monitoring equipment that goes with that. So there's an increase for the data with that. The other thing is with the transition to regional dispatch, our phone recorder for the station was part of the 911 equipment with us here. Hasn't been removed. They actually left us the recorder, but there's a service fee that we're going to need to cover for the phone recorder. And then the last thing that I'm looking to add this year, it's about $2,400. When they created and passed the police reform laws in 2000 and created POST, the Police Officer Standards and Training Commission, one of the things that we're required to do is track discipline. So what we're proposing is that we added a system called Guardian Tracking, and the disciplinary part of it is actually pretty easy. But what we don't do and have never done a good job of in policing in general is track the positives. And what this system does is it allows us a system to easily track the positives that the officers can see, that the supervisors can do on a daily basis, so that if we do run into the disciplinary issue, we've tracked everything that an officer is doing. Things that I wouldn't generally, as the police chief, see on how they handled a single call that may not have generated like a commendation in the past. At least it's something that we can track and keep notes on, so that if we do run into an issue with an officer, we have that offsetting positive to show the 100 positive things to the 1 negative. It's really a liability reduction tool for the town, and for a $2,500 investment or $2,400 investment, it seems to make a lot of sense. We combined just the supplies lines. Again, there was no increases there. And another large increase, even though not a large dollar amount, is under animal control. So as many of you may or may not know, we have another member of the department that's not covered under our full-time equipment. It's a service dog. His name is West. And we, through a grant program from a group called Guide Dogs of America based in Los Angeles, we were able to get a free dog. So the dog works in the schools and works with our seniors and really can work with any aspect of the community. But there's some added costs for that, for his food and some of his vet bills, even though the costs are reduced. So, it seemed logical to keep it under the animal control line, which covered animals. And it gets paid to the same veterinary clinic that some of our animal control expenses get paid to. So that's about a $2,300 increase for the year. But it's a large increase under that line. And then just a reduction in expenses under new hire equipment. As I mentioned, we are in a good place staffing wise right now. It doesn't mean everyone's going to stay and we're not going to have some transition, but we had 4 new officers come in last year. That's not our expectation. So we're able to reduce that line and hopefully not have to expend much of any of that line throughout the next fiscal year. So that's really where things lie, and I'm sure you have tons of questions.
All right, so thanks, Tom.
Yeah.
Let me just start things off with asking you if you could say just a little bit more about the up near the top, the incentive pay lines and the holiday pay line. So those both, while the overtime, of course, went down, those both went up. So you just say a little more about
Yeah.
what's going on with
There
those.
was, there was a restructuring of well, holiday pay, there was an additional holiday added this year with Juneteenth. And so that was part of that increase, or a large part of that increase. And then the incentive pay, there was some restructuring in incentive pay. We have a kind of a two-tiered incentive system where some officers have a flat rate, other officers are percentage based. As a retention tool, we've changed and added the potential for more officers to get into that percentage-based incentive system after 5 years of service. So that reflects the officers that have been here beyond 5 years that are now in that system.
Okay, thanks. So Peter, let's go to you. You're muted, Peter.
Okay, there we go. With the EV, the vehicle, electric vehicle, is there retrofitting of the police station for the cord, the plug?
I was actually
in
going
this
to talk
budget?
about that, yeah, when I talked about capital. But so yes and no. So I actually had a discussion with Gino last week. So he's able to program the charger that's out front of the town hall, which would allow the town to use it without paying the fees that the general public uses for that. But also the through the state green communities and the EVIC program, there's 2 potential grants for us, or actually more than 2. There would be a charging grant, but also specific to the vehicles. So maybe to highlight that is for capital, there's 2 proposed vehicles. It's a Ford Mustang Mach-E and a Ford F-150 hybrid pickup truck. So for the Mach-E, there's a $7,500 incentive. And for the pickup truck, just because it's a police vehicle, there's a $5,000 incentive that we can apply for through those programs. Now, they're first come, first served. There's no guarantee that we'll get it. But with the ability to use the plug that would come with the vehicle at a normal outlet, but also having that a more robust charger out in front of the town offices, would allow us to potentially not have to install that equipment. My goal would be to eventually do that here as we look at the potential for more EVs, but it's not a hard and fast necessary expense this year. But if we can fund it through those grants and those rebates, then that's something that I think we would look at.
Right. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Tom. So
and I have photos if you want to see of the Mach-E, because I know at Capitol we had that discussion, because when we say Mustang, sometimes the traditional muscle car, sports car comes to mind, but it's not, it doesn't quite look like that. So if you want to see those, I can show you those.
All right. So when we come, maybe you can pop those up when we come around to talking about capital items in just a bit. Anybody else with questions on these budget lines? Steve, go ahead.
Thanks, Chief. I've got a couple of questions. So for training, there's a couple of lines up in the salaries. There's the in-service training line at 25,000, and then down in expenses, there's the just says training, and that line is at 23,000. I just wanted to. I believe that last year we kind of were given a rundown of the reason for additional training expenses. And I see that they're level for this year, but I guess I just wanted to find out, have you needed those increases this year? I mean, I guess I could ask Deb what the run rate is on those, but if you could also just kind of give an overview of training costs.
So on the in-service training line, so that covers the officer costs when they're going to the specific classes. So we're really getting into the heat of that now with our annual required 40 hours of training that each officer does. And then the other line, that the actual training line under the expense line, so that covers a variety of things. So that covers course costs that we pay in addition to in-service training. So for example, the detective is going to a drug investigation course in a couple weeks, and he was at a search warrant class today. So those course fees come out of there. But the other things that come out of there are our ammunition costs for our training for firearms. Now that our taser capital item has been expended, the training cartridges that we utilize for those. So, you know, targets and any of the expenses of the physical things that we need to purchase for the training that we actually do. So it's a combination of things that actually come out of that expense.
And so far in the current fiscal year, have you been basically using those lines as budgeted?
Yep. So we've probably spent half or maybe a little bit more of the expense line, and tomorrow's payroll that we do will probably be the first time that we're diving into the in-service training line. So that's just started over the last couple of weeks. We do a group in-service training program with Holliston, Dover, Medfield, Medway, Ashland, Wayland now, and that's where our classes and expenses are coming from that.
Yeah, Chief, you're right on target. I was going to say we didn't have any expenses so far in the in-service training, and in the expense line for training, I think we've spent already $9,200. But I know on the warrant that we just processed today, there was a big charge, maybe a $2,300 charge to the town of Holliston for some training and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's part of the in-service program that we do, that we pay for the instructors for that.
So.
Thanks. And then I've got another question, and this is regarding the surplus equipment fund. And I asked this question of Director Colleen last week, and I will be asking it of Chief Ward after you. So I sort of philosophically have a bit of a hang up about that surplus equipment fund, because, you know, revolving funds, pretty much every other revolving fund that the town has, the source of the fund is outside of the tax levy. You know, it's just independent funds that come from somewhere else. Whereas that fund, essentially, the money that goes into it, it was the town's money to start with. And so essentially what I would like to see would be for each of your three departments, you know, each year when you're looking at the how much your surplus revolving fund has, would be to find ways to take that out of your equipment lines in your operating budget. So I believe currently the police department's allocation in that revolving fund is around 12,000. So I guess my question would be, are there places in this operating budget where you feel like you could reduce your equipment related expenses and essentially preferentially use funds from that revolving fund should you need it? I'm thinking, for example, you have a line new equipment other that's only $1,000, and then you had mentioned about the new hire equipment it's at 10,000, and you were thinking that hopefully you won't really need to even use much or any of that. So I'm wondering, could we reduce those somewhat, and then, you know, should you find that you needed more money for new hire equipment, you could essentially just go and to the select board and you know, use your revolving fund money for that.
That is definitely a possibility and something that I consider. You know, one of the things that I'm looking at that fund about as well is, I mentioned that I applied for a grant on the body cameras. There's a matching component to that. And from what I've learned in my time here, we don't have any funds set aside for matching grants and things like that. So that's something I'm keeping in mind for that fund as well. And also, even particularly a year like this, I think Deb, if she looked at her numbers, she could see that we've more than overspent our vehicle repair line this year because of some substantial repairs. That's something. I have some tires and some other things I may have to purchase this year that I considered that I may, you know, present to the select board to come out of that line as well. But if that's something in a philosophical approach that we want to take to those revolving accounts, that's a discussion I'm willing to have as we move forward.
Great, thanks so much, Chief. I'll leave it up to Dan whether he would or I suppose the rest of the advisory committee, whether he would like to see an alteration in it right now, or sometimes what we do is we just kind of ask each department like, hey, if we find that the town's budget overall is just going too high and we just got to go around to each department and say, hey, can we tighten things a little bit? If that is a thing that you would be willing to be flexible on, then it's possible that that we may just come back and ask for that at some point before the public hearing. But I suppose I would be interested to hear what the rest of advisory has to say about that.
Yeah, anybody else have a thought on that? So I'll jump in. I take the point that Chief, that you are kind of thinking of holding that back possibly for grant matching and a bit of flexibility. Best guess is we're going to end up as we get close to the public hearing, feeling like the budget's pretty tight. I think it's maybe a little too soon to say that. I think we need to learn more about what's going to happen with the schools and so on. So I think, because I haven't heard things from other people in advisory, I think the way I'd suggest we leave it is let's leave it as is for now. But I'd say let's plan on maybe having that conversation and being prepared to have that conversation depending on how things go. Anybody else on Jane?
Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Did I understand you to say, Chief, that you are taking over Code Red from the select board?
Yes.
So I don't recall, did we see a corresponding decrease in the select board budget for that? I don't have that budget in front of me. Deb, maybe you know, or Jeremy?
Yeah, they definitely took it out of their budget.
Okay, thank you. And then just PD other expenses. Can you just help us understand, what kinds of things are in that line item?
So, and that's something, actually a good question that we might want to have a discussion about as we move forward. So that's really two things that come out of that. One was a accreditation consultant that we added last year. And the other was we're part of a regional jail diversion program, which is a clinician that works, embedded clinician that works with us, Holliston and Hopkinton. So that covers our fees beyond the DMH grants to cover that program. So it really pays for only two things. So I don't know if they should be classified differently in the future, but we're also going to have a meeting tomorrow with DMH at looking at possibly changing the way our program is handled, and which could change the funding and actually possibly have some things covered more by the grant and have less payment by the town.
Thank you. And then, not a lot of money, but it just looks like we've added a school resource officer. I'm just curious as to what that is.
Yep, so that's a stipend for the officer that's assigned as a school resource officer. So it's paid out twice a year, $500 each time for that as that officer as a specialty position.
So it sounds like that, along with some of the other incentive pay, is just part of the latest contract.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So Chief, if depending on how that meeting goes tomorrow, if you could just keep us posted on how that shakes out, that'd be great.
Absolutely, yeah. We're trying to do some things in the mental health world right now, especially with some of the clinicians that work within policing and the embedded clinicians. It's very difficult to hire people, and we, our actual embedded clinician left to take over a single community versus working with a 3-town kind of consortium. So the group advocates out of Framingham is looking to hire a replacement for them, and we're getting kind of fill-in people. So that's really what's sparking this meeting, to see if we can come at it from another way to be able to make sure that we have the coverage as well.
All right. Anybody else? So I think I have one more for you. And this is just, I think, what you said before. I just went a little too fast for me. I missed a couple. I just got garbled on a couple things. So on the body cam issue, So as you said, and as you and I have talked about before, getting to the end of the life of the body cam. So is your current thinking that that would be a future, that would be a capital purchase, or that would be like a rental deal where you pay a company a fee to provide the equipment and data storage and so on? And I just
Yeah,
trying
there's
to
a
get
few
back in my
ways.
head how that's likely to go.
There's a few ways to do it. There would be, no matter what, whatever type of a contract we entered into, there would be data storage for the video. But it could be a purchase option on the cameras, or depending upon the company that we would go with, it would basically be like that lease option where it's all kind of factored into one yearly cost per camera. So,
And right now, does any of that appear in the FY24 budget, or is that all about kind of in the future?
In the that admin information systems is currently there's $7,000 in there for data storage for the video. So it's in that line, and that's the only thing that's really covered in there on the body camera data storage. And then there's some money in the equipment repairs for batteries and things like that that we need to replace.
Okay. And did that portion increase a lot? Are you anticipating a big increase in 24 in that, or is that roughly where it was in 23 for that?
So it's roughly where it was in 23, but if you remember in that we just spent the remainder of our body cameras and our tasers, they're supplied by the same company, and they're very much intertwined on the data. And so for the past several years, we've been paying about $5,000 a year out of a old capital line that was for those tasers. So that we lost that this year. So that incorporates that increase into the expense line budget.
Okay. That's very helpful. Thanks. Anybody else before we pivot and talk just briefly about capital? Okay, Chief, shall I go ahead and switch and put the capital?
Yeah, sure.
I know it's just a couple items, but I can pop it up so everybody can see the numbers.
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I think you can see in that has the body camera in that FY25 line.
Let's see here. I have so many files open here. It takes just a minute to get there. Okay. So this should be it. Is that
readable? So it's 2 vehicles this year, totaled out just over $122,000.
Hold on. Hang on. Sorry, I just messed up here. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. We're back. Sorry.
So we're transitioning away from 2 traditional internal combustion engines, one to a F-150 special services hybrid vehicle. I don't know if you remember last year as we started talking about capital, this had actually been my plan for last year. And then ultimately we found out a hybrid was not going to be available. And our plan had been to purchase a gas model of the pickup. We kind of had to pivot mid-year when Ford decided they weren't going to produce roughly 12,000 public safety class vehicles into another Chevrolet for this current fiscal year. So this would be the Ford F-150, provide us a lot of flexibility. We'll be replacing one of our Explorers with that. And then the second is the Mustang Mach-E, so an all-electric vehicle, which is, that's the future. That's the way we're moving. Some of our neighbors and some of our, in the region have already made this switch. We were a little skeptical last year because there wasn't a lot of aftermarket, the lights and the equipment specifically designed to go in that. That's improved over the last 12 months. So that would be the Mustang Mach-E EV. And as Peter had asked earlier about the charging equipment possibly for the Mustang, that's something that is, if the grant is available, we would do right away. But if the grant funding is not available, it's something that we don't necessarily need to do immediately. My expectation is that we come back in FY25, that would be another electric vehicle that I would be looking at as well. And we would really have to start to talk more deeply about the charging infrastructure that would come along with that for the future. And I do, if I can share real quick, because I know it did come up at Capitol. I don't know if you want to let me share, and I can just show you the pictures of the Mach-E, and where is it? Oh, come on. I have too many screens open. Come on. It's not showing up as one of my. Try it again. All right, can we see that?
Yeah, that's good.
All right, so it's the Mustang Mach-E, so it gives you a little depiction of it. So again, not what you would think would be your traditional Mustang sports car. Looks a little bit more like a hatchback type SUV. And as you can see, Weston, one of our relatively close communities, already has one in service. And here's one for Topsfield. And so it's really out there. They're more readily available than they were before, and they really, the aftermarket companies have stepped up and are now producing the equipment to be able to add them into the police fleets. And then the last would be just the hybrid SSV. So nothing spectacular, but just to give you an idea of what that vehicle would look like, because as kind of was raised by the concern raised by Capital was that it's, when we start talking Mustang, people may not necessarily see it for what it is and think it's a different type of vehicle.
All right. Thanks, Chief. So, and as Peter reported, capital budget, I gather, said yes to both of those last night. Steve, the floor is yours.
Thanks. All right, couple questions. One is the numbers that the capital request is for. Does that encompass everything that you need for the vehicles, or is there any additional equipment or retrofitting that would be needed on top of that?
No, the quotes that I received for those vehicles encompass all of the retrofit items that are necessary.
Great. And then the vehicles that they're replacing, are you anticipating getting any reasonable value at auction for those?
We'll have to see. If I were to base it off of a year ago, we would probably be looking at some incredible value. The used car market is taking a little bit of a hit. So, I mean, I would expect between a couple of vehicles, $5,000 to $10,000, based on the year and the wear and tear that are on the ones we have. We send them to auction, and we've done very well with auction, especially last year. But I don't know where that's going to sit. But there will be, and this is that money that into that surplus account that that you discussed, where that money would go. So.
And then last question is that do you have any estimates on what the service life of these vehicles would be? I mean, especially the EV. I would imagine that not many police departments have had them for 5+ years. So do we know how long they'll last?
Right. So that's a good question. So we don't. The thought process, from my perspective, on all of these patrol vehicles or any vehicle that's in patrol is a 5-year life. They're going to get, especially now with the transition of regional dispatch, they're going to get more use. So 25,000 miles per year. So that 5-year useful lifespan is kind of where I see a frontline patrol vehicle to be. With something that's an admin vehicle, we're getting into a much longer lifespan. With the EV, the one benefit is at least the battery warranty is 8 years. So we have that to kind of fall back on when we start to be concerned about the batteries and the viability of the power plant. But in terms of long-term use and viability, I can't answer that on an EV yet. We're still kind of learning that. The one good thing that we're seeing with the market is, when they talk about police vehicles, they talk about this one, like the pickup truck has an SSV, and with the Tahoes and the Explorers, and that they're classified as PPVs, which are pursuit rated vehicles that just beefed up. Next year, Chevrolet is releasing a pursuit rated Chevy Blazer midsize SUV as an all electric. So it's coming, and they're coming really specifically geared towards police vehicles.
Thanks. I guess one other semi-related question is the sort of service and maintenance costs of the EVs, is that significantly different than a standard vehicle?
It should be in some respects. And actually, Nora asked a question during capital and made me do some little research on tires on them. And so, yes, so brakes and, no oil changes. Brakes, there's regenerative braking, and the brakes are not replaced as often. But because of their weight, there can be some more wear on the tires. So that's weight to be seen. So definitely, but there'll also be an offset. The electric cost should be less than the fuel cost. So there should be an offset there as well.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Just a quick follow-up. You had mentioned for the vehicles that would go to auction, 5 to 10K. Is that like 5 to 10K per vehicle, or that was sort of for both?
I would expect with the vehicles we're auctioning, I'm guessing maybe 5,000 per.
Okay.
I mean, we were over 10 on the last Explorer we auctioned, but again, that was a year ago when you couldn't touch a used vehicle. So
Yeah. Okay.
it was overinflated.
Okay. Asking because that, if there's another 10K coming into that revolving fund, that circles back to the earlier conversation we had about how best to handle that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Generally, what we've seen is the cars that go to auction, we're getting much more. If we were to trade these in, we'd be getting pennies on the dollar.
Yeah. You're going to the right. Yeah, it's going to the right place where there are people who want these, right? Very good. Peter, the floor is yours.
Yes, Chief, refresh my memory. These aren't exact replacements for the cruisers that are taken offline. And I recall that they're not going to have the cage in the back. They're in a few other.
The pickup truck will. The pickup truck will be just the storage area will be the bed versus the back of an SUV. There'll be a full cage in that, and all the other equipment. There will not be a cage that goes into the Mach-E, correct?
So the two vehicles being replaced both have cages, so we're down a vehicle without a cage?
Yeah, but that would still leave us with one or two vehicles on shift that always have a cage in it. Fortunately, you had asked me about crime rate last time too. We're not making 2 or 3 arrests at a time every shift. That it still allows us the flexibility we need to transport those people that we will be transporting. To have a vehicle out there without a cage is not unheard of, and actually it will provide us a little bit more flexibility with the vehicle, depending on what direction we go with it. If it's a day-to-day patrol vehicle, it's a vehicle that also, if we're sending 3 or 4 officers to training, by not having a cage in it, they can take a vehicle that doesn't have a cage, which we don't have that flexibility right now.
Thank you.
All right. So who else with questions for Chief Galvin? Okay. I think we're good. Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate your going through all of that carefully.
Oh, but if any more questions come up at any time, just let me know and I'd be happy to come back and answer.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so let's go on to Chief Ward to talk about fire and ambulance.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are you going to pull up the fire budget?
Yes.
Okay.
Give me just 1 second here and I will get that up and going. And here we are.
Okay, so if it's okay with you, I'm just going to start. I'm going to cover wages first.
Sure.
And, we can talk about it, then go into expenses. So really the two big changes on the salary side, there's a reduction of $7,800 in the call firefighter stipends. The committee may recall that that was a new initiative that we added last year. And my calculation for the FY24 budget is based on the actual usage for this year and adding a couple people to it over the next year. So basically I over budgeted for the first year. I over estimated what we would need. So there's a reduction there for that. And then the other increase, you see a 7.38% increase on the FD officers line. Those are the salaries for our 9 on-call officers on the fire department. The 7.38% increase isn't 4.5 because the Form 5 was incorrectly calculated for last year. So we basically just corrected it this year. And that's why you see that 7.38 instead of the 4.5. Any questions on the salaries? Seeing none, I guess I'll move on to expenses. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Wasim's got a question, I think.
Oh, finally. Okay, you can hear me. Sorry, my microphone has been acting up for the past half hour. So sorry, would you mind saying that again on the 7.38? That was an increase that was supposed to go into last year's budget and didn't go, and so now you're doing kind of double increases?
Basically, we just fixed what was already happening with SEAM. It wasn't reflected accurately in this budget because the Form 5, the way that it was set up on the Excel, it didn't correctly calculate it. So we're basically just fixing it to reflect what's actually happening.
Okay.
So basically,
wasn't programmed right.
last year's number was incorrect.
Exactly.
Okay. So last year's number in last year's budget was incorrect. Was not actually 46,000. That's what you're saying.
It should have been 47, a little over 47,000. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Thanks.
And just to jump in for a second on the firefighter stipends, as you noted, the 15K is best estimate for this year. Does that mean for 23, barring some other unexpected thing, there'd be, turn back of an excess for the
Yep.
fiscal 23? I mean, yeah, okay, good.
It will
Thanks.
be.
Yeah, thanks.
Moving over to expenses. I'll just hit the two biggest increases there. Vehicle maintenance, which is the first line, is up 11%. It's based solely on actuals. That line has traditionally been under budgeted. It's something I wanted to wait and see how it went, just because I was new, but we have about 10 vehicles, which include 6 large, fire trucks. When certain things happen to those vehicles, we have to send them out. They can't be fixed by the in-house mechanics. Certain components of them, they have to be worked on by certified emergency vehicle mechanics. This number is still considerably low for a town with the fleet that we have. And we have a large fleet because of the water situation, not having any no pressurized hydrants in town, but that's the reason for that increase. Then the cellular is going up 42%. So with the transition to the regional dispatch system, through that, we got a grant for, I think it was 92,000 for computers for the apparatus, which is something that we did not have. So for some of those apparatus, we have to carry a cellular plan on them so they will work in the field. And those computers allow us to get critical information about the buildings in town. Every single property in this town, floor plans, permits that have been pulled, photos of the houses, and then for the big buildings, layouts of critical infrastructure, electric shutoffs, things like that. That's a huge upgrade for the fire department. Again, we got I think it was about 92,000 in funding for that. But our portion of that cost is going to be that 1,500 for the cellular plans. Just a major upgrade for the department. I think those are the two what I would call significant increases on the expense side. I'd be happy to take any questions about expenses.
Anybody with questions for Chief Ward? Steve, go ahead.
Thanks. I like your budget, looks good. A few questions where I'm actually almost wondering whether some of these things are low, but I'm looking at tires and hoses. You got zero for this year, zero for next year. Do you truly anticipate not needing to purchase any of those?
So tires, a couple of years ago went away, and we at the time decided to include that in vehicle maintenance, but I do not expect to buy any
Okay.
tires, if you're wondering.
Okay, I see. I see.
Hose, we scrapped that line and we added it to the new equipment line. But with two things, with the town's capital article for hose last year and some grant funding that we've applied for more hose, we don't expect to see any need for hose.
Okay.
But if we did, say if we had a couple lengths, we actually lost a length of hose Friday at midnight at a fire. But I would buy that section of hose from the new equipment line now. We did it to decrease the number of lines at the time.
Wait, am I not? Which line is the new equipment line?
It's incorrectly labeled on here. It says SCBA equipment,
Okay.
5,800.
Okay.
Fifth from the bottom.
Okay. So that's not just SCBA. That's kind of any.
It's everything.
equipment.
Yeah.
It's everything. Got it.
Yep.
Got it. And then, so then I saw a couple of lines where your ask is decreasing and it is actually lower than your 3-year average. So the protective clothing line, your 3-year average is 28,000, and then you're bringing it down to almost half of that. Can you?
So the
enlighten me there?
department, yeah. So when I started the department, had a lot of issues with fire gear. That's fire gear basically. And we've caught up. We've done a lot to catch up, which includes grant funding and other things. Last year, we weren't projected to go over too much. At the time, I ordered some gear in February of last year. When I when I ordered it, it was projected to take 9 months to show up. And some gear showed up in May or the beginning of June. So we had to pay for it last year, which is why it went over so much this past fiscal year. Good thing and a bad thing, I guess. But the department's come a long way with catching up for the gear. Every single one of our current members has a compliant set of gear. So we carry that 14,000 forward for new hires in the event that we don't have anything that fits them, which is common. Or if things need to be replaced, like say somebody's coat gets ripped at a fire or a car accident or something like that, we got to buy a coat. Just to give you a heads up, a full complement of fire gear right now for one of our members is approximately $5,000. So.
Okay. All right. So essentially 15,000 would cover 3 full sets of gear.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. And then I guess similarly, then that OSHA equipment PPE line also is decreasing. Is that sort of the same underlying basis as the?
Exactly. We've historically bought the helmets from that. The helmets are about $400 a piece now for structural firefighting. We've caught up on that. We're decreasing it because of that. We still have our next goal is to outfit everybody with forestry helmets. We don't have good forestry fire gear for brush fires. And that's what we hope to use that money for in FY24.
Great. And I guess all this equipment talk kind of leads me to the question that I asked Chief Galvin earlier regarding the surplus equipment revolving fund. I think you guys have about 9,000 in it right now. So even with these reductions in your equipment lines, do you feel like there are areas where you could say you could reasonably plan on using your revolving fund to purchase some things and thereby reduce some of these operating expense lines?
So it would be tough to, and the reason for us is, and I don't want you to think I'm copying Chief Galvin, because I think I said this when the fund was created. if we didn't go out and get the grants that we get every year, that SCBA equipment line would need to be 45,000, I would estimate. So I rely on that revolving fund for the matching funds for those grants typically. In fact, at the next select board meeting or the one after that, I'm going to have a request for about $4,500 from that fund, just for that, for matching funds for grants that we've already gotten. So I think it would be pretty difficult for us to do that. And I totally understand your question and your reasoning, but we've, historically been pretty good with grants. Just to give you an idea on equipment, engine 4, which is below me right now, our primary engine has 209 separate pieces of equipment on it, technically, if you counted every item and that's without counting each section of hose. So we have a lot of stuff, a lot of tools. So it would be difficult for us to do that. I think we use it. That's the way that we've traditionally used it.
Great. Thanks, Zach.
Okay. Jane, go ahead, please.
Just a question on IT services. Some have been moved to the IT department, but you do still have a line item here for that. Can you just help me understand what those services are and why it's not appropriate to move them to the IT department?
Yeah, so you'll see this on this budget, Jane, and the ambulance budget. There's a 7,000 line on the ambulance budget for IT. All of it is, I should say mostly all of it is for software that is directly for the fire department. So when I started, just to give you some numbers, when I started in the department, we had 6 separate software systems that we used. We still have 6, but we're in the process of transitioning 3 of them to 1. So I hope to be down to 4 next year, and then hopefully go down further even from there. I have the breakdown of what all of them cost. The cost for the fire side of the software is about $15,500, and then we save the other $500 for equipment, like the computer mounts in the apparatus or the ambulance, stuff like that. So if we need to replace that, and that's what that line's for. It's all fire specific stuff. And the same thing on the ambulance side. The ambulance side is our EMS reporting software. So,
Thank you.
sure.
All right. Anybody else with questions for Chief Ward? So Zach, do you want to go to ambulance? You want to go to capital budget? What works
I
best?
think ambulance will be good. Yeah.
Okay, give me just a second and I will get that up.
We'll keep going through the lines,
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, it should be up in just a second.
So I'll do the same thing. I'll just hit the salaries first. Obviously, there's a big increase in the first line, the EMT compensation. There are 3 reasons for the increase in that line. Number 1 is the COLA, the 4.5% COLA. That's over a $15,000 hit on that line. The second one is this. As you may recall, last year we had a quality assurance expense where the department used to hire an outside consultant to do quality assurance for us. What that means is every single ambulance call report that we do is read by a quality assurance professional. It's graded, it's scored. Negative feedback, or I should say corrective feedback, or positive feedback are given to the EMTs for that call. It's a really good program. It's something that we have to have through our affiliation agreement with Metro West Framingham and our medical director. So there used to be an expense for that. At the time, we were paying $3,900, and it was projected to go up to $5,000. We had an internal person that was able to do that work instead of sending it to a consultant. So I transitioned the work to him. He was working an ambulance shift, so there wasn't supposed to be any cost to the town for that work. Well, that was the plan, at least for FY23. In July, he had to come off of an ambulance shift for personal reasons. So now I have to pay his hours out to do that work. That's about a $3,200 hit on that line. The third reason is $12,000 for just regular ambulance shift coverage. So every year I take the ambulance schedule and I try to predict how it's going to be covered, whether it's people at the station, which it usually is, or on call shifts. For FY23, I budgeted for an average of 3.5 on-call shifts per week, which means the person's paid less because they're not at the station. And based on our usage, or I should say our staffing, for the first 6 months of FY23, I under budgeted by about $11,000, which is an average of a shift a week. So that's why there's that increase in that line. It's simply correcting where we are for this year. I've tried to not completely budget for people to be in the station. I've tried to budget for go conservative and budget for what we actually needed, and it kind of bit me here where I under budgeted a little bit for FY23, and those are the three reasons why that line is going up.
On the quality assurance one, is there a spot where that roughly 3,900 comes out somewhere from another line, or the line that would have been in?
I already did that last year. I took it out of.
Okay.
If you see the second expense line down zeroed out for FY23.
Oh, of course.
That's where that came out last year.
Okay. And then the change is that it had been that the internal person was doing an ambulance shift and it was kind of covered there, and that situation changed and now they're not. So, okay, I got it. Thank you.
Yeah. And he's done an incredible job. I want to keep him in that because when he started, we had an average of 1 call flagged per week with the former QA system. And now we have about 1 per quarter, which is a huge improvement in the quality of care.
And so is that because the quality assurance is being done differently, or because with the constructive feedback, the actual calls are going better?
It's the feedback and the training that comes from the quality assurance work. Where we didn't get that with the outside consultant to the level that we do internally. So he does a tremendous job with that. So
good, glad to hear it.
Yeah.
So who else with questions for Zach?
I can hit expenses now if you'd like, Dan.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm going to hit the 3.
If you don't mind, actually.
Sorry about that.
So the 9.37% is a combination of the 4.5.
Yep.
Right, and this increase of, let's say, 3,900, or let's say 5,000. And what's the third component again? I'm sorry, I heard you, but I didn't internalize it in my brain, if you don't mind.
Quite all right, sir. So when I put this budget together, I try to predict how the ambulance is going to get staffed, Wasim. So the ambulance is primarily staffed with 2 part-time employees in the building 24/7. But we average, we have 28 12-hour shifts a week that we fill. We average a few shifts a week with having an on-call person covering the ambulance from their home. It's, they have to live close enough that there's certain requirements they have to meet to do that. And I predicted that we'd have an average of 3.5 on-call shifts per week in FY23, but we're averaging, it's really like 2.4 per week in FY23. So that's the difference in salaries for having basically 1.1 shifts per week here versus on call. Does that make sense?
So you predicted 3.5 on-call hours per week, but we're actually having, I'm sorry, shifts, per week, but we're actually having 2.4. So is that less, you mean? Less on call?
So that means there's more people. There's 1 extra shift a week on average where the person's in the station. rather than being on home, which is actually a good thing because it's way safer to have both people here leaving together as a crew to respond to medicals, particularly at night, which is when most of our on-call shifts are at night.
Got it. Got it.
And
got it.
that's the reason why that increase is there. I'm just reflecting how FY23 is going. If that makes sense.
I see. I see. I see. So like essentially that is really the dominant. After the 4.5, that is really the dominant. The other one is, I mean, it sounds to me like
Smaller.
$5,000 is really minuscule compared to these two, right? Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. No, thank you. As far as I'll hit the 3 big expense changes. So the vehicle maintenance again is up in this. It's based on actuals. Deb, I don't know if you have our run rate for this year. I know we have a big bill coming for that line. The ambulance is 7 years old now, completely out of warranty. It's our busiest vehicle in the fleet. And 1,500 just simply isn't enough. To be honest with you, 22, depending on what could happen in a given year, 2,250 might not be enough. You just never know what can happen on the maintenance side. Obviously, we have one ambulance, and when it breaks, we got to fix it. But that's the reason for that increase. The supplies, I got to see what line. Ambulance first aid supplies is up $750. And ambulance equipment is up $1,000. That's for one particular reason. So because we only have one ambulance, we completely outfit engine 4. I'm getting some feedback, I think, from whoever DS is.
Yeah, that's me. My computer died on me, so now I'm on my phone.
Oh,
But
okay. Sorry, Deb.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, but Zach, I don't have your run rates for the ambulance just because it's a different fund. I only have fund 010, so I don't have
Okay.
the revolving fund.
I think it's
Sorry.
about 3,000 right now for FY23. We had the locking system in the ambulance failed a few weeks ago when we were locked out of the ambulance. Well, I wasn't, but the crew was at a hospital, and it ended up being a big repair. But going back to the first aid supplies and equipment. So engine 4, which is the primary fire engine for the town, is outfitted with medical supplies. All the apparatus are, but engine 4 has more than everything else. And that's for one particular reason. When our ambulance is out on a call, and this happens about up to 20 times a year, we get a second medical while we already have one medical call in progress. So engine 4 responds immediately with a couple people to provide aid until a mutual aid ambulance responds. The state changed the way they license that, and we have to carry more stuff on it to be able to do that work. And that's why we have that increase to those 2 lines. Any questions on the expenses?
Everybody's good? Okay.
And then I just want to point out, so if you see that.
Yeah, if you finish up the bottom part.
Yeah. So our projection is 205,000 for revenue, which means to balance the budget, where our request from the omnibus is 232,500. That's the line that you see highlighted. So any questions on that? And that it just so I think you all are aware that shows up on the omnibus as budget 230 instead of 231.
Yeah, I have one question, just because you have it listed as ATM supplemental, but I might have the accounting wrong, and Deb, maybe you can straighten me out if I'm wrong, but I thought that, so if you're asking for 232 from the omnibus, right, then that is actually, it's a budget item and it is included in the tax levy.
Yes.
Whereas the supplemental appropriations, generally speaking, are for various things that were unexpected overages, and they usually come out of free cash, which I believe that we have done previously quite often with the ambulance, because just chronically we're drastically underfunding it.
Yeah,
So,
you.
yeah, so I just want
you're
to
exactly
clarify
right.
what's happening here.
You're exactly right, Steve. So this is the ambulance budget that's in the omnibus. If we need a supplemental, it's for one or two reasons. A, we previously completely underfunded the ambulance, and we worked for years to get it up to it has to do with when they gave raises, I think 5 years ago, but it was a couple of years before my time, and we kind of caught up. But the other reason why we might do a supplemental is if the revenue is lower than projected. But you're absolutely right. That's the budget that we're planning on spending. And if for some reason we're low, we ask for a supplemental at town meeting.
So then my question is, just so that I know that we've got apples to apples here. So when we look at the FY20 actual, 21 actual, 22 actual, where it says 190 and then 265 and then 190 again, were those the omnibus budget lines for ambulance, or were those actual supplemental appropriations?
I believe those were that should be the omnibus line.
No,
Okay,
actually, I think I'm gonna have to go back and double check, but I'm pretty sure that is the combination of both the operating line and the supplemental, if there was a supplemental that year.
okay. And
I
our
can
goal,
break that down, yeah.
okay. But our goal should be to include the appropriate amount in the omnibus so that, there shouldn't be a supplemental, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
I
Okay.
think going forward, where that supplemental, how it's labeled now supplemental, but the budget is, I think the only thing that should cause that, barring something really unforeseen, the only thing that should cause it is if the revenue doesn't come in as projected for whatever reason.
Okay.
And I've talked about it before. It's kind of hard to predict. It depends on three things: the number of runs we do, the number of transports that we get out of those runs, and the type of insurance that the people have that we transport. Just to give you a comparison, for somebody that has Medicare, we make about $500. If they have private insurance and it's an ALS transport, we make about $2,500. But if they have Medicare, it's about $500. So and we don't have any choice over that. So the revenue's sometimes hard to predict because of those things. So.
And then I have a question, maybe more for Deb, or actually maybe even Jeremy. So I know traditionally that there are various budgets that legally you are allowed to under budget and then supplement, snow and ice and legal being the two examples. I'm assuming that ambulance also sort of skirts that because it's a revolving fund. Is that accurate?
That is correct.
Okay. And just kind of like, this is me spitballing, but so when we include the anticipated sort of like gap in the ambulance fund in the omnibus, that goes into the tax levy. So therefore it affects the tax rate. Whereas if there is a free cash appropriation in order to cover it, that does not affect the tax rate. I'm not saying that we should do that, but I'm just saying that in terms of how does all of this affect the tax rate, there is a certain advantage to using free cash to cover the gap here, as opposed to using the tax levy. Is that?
I think you're technically correct.
Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah,
know
yeah,
that is something that we should do, and that might be one of those things that S&P dings us for. But I'm just kind of like looking at how all of these things affect our tax rate.
Yeah, I think you're correct. I have to kind of go back and take a closer look at the revolving fund, because you set up a revolving fund to, so that the expenses and the revenue match basically. So if we continuously don't match, that might be an issue. I would have to go back and look a little closer at that.
Steve, were you suggesting that, of the 232, 500, that currently Zach is proposing be an omnibus budget, that be a smaller number, and hey, if it ends up not being enough, use free cash for that?
I would not say that I am suggesting that, no. But I
Okay.
am saying that
That we
you know,
could do
in
that.
previous years, we have severely underfunded. the
Yeah,
ambulance
yeah,
budget,
yeah.
And the end result was we would have to do a 6-figure supplemental appropriation
Yep.
at town meeting.
Yep,
But the advantage of that is that essentially that kept that number out of the tax levy.
Yeah.
That's probably poor fiscal management strategy would be my guess. and I don't think that I would advocate for it, but for me it's just a matter of understanding what this means for the tax rate going forward.
yeah, got it.
Just kind of verbalizing it so that I understand.
got it. Yeah, I do suspect that S&P would look at that kind of use of free cash as not something that they would be super enthusiastic about.
Right. Knowingly underfunding something so that
Exactly.
you don't have to tax up to it. That's probably
you
bad
know,
idea.
Sort of using free cash to pull the tax rate down. Yeah, I think they wouldn't be thrilled by that. I suspect too, although this clearly remains to be seen, but I suspect too there will be a good number of draws on free cash this year. As just we'll see as we get closer to the public hearing, but as a guess, I think that may be where we end up. Okay, but that was a helpful clarification, Steve, so that I understand exactly what you're up to with raising that issue. Zach, more that you wanted to talk about?
I don't have anything else to add, but I see that Jane has a question. I can take that if you'd like.
Perfect.
Thanks, Zach. I just wanted to ask you, I think I recall, maybe it was last year, that you were looking into, and I don't remember the right terminology, but having the ambulances be able to provide a higher level of service, and then we could charge more, and then maybe, it would work out well economically. I'm assuming that it turned out that wasn't the case, but I'm just curious as to what happened with all of that.
So there's two parts to that. The economic side, we could make more because right now we go to a lot of calls. So right now we're BLS. That would be an ALS service if we move to that, Jane. So right now we're BLS. We do a lot of medicals where we're kind of on the fence if it needs to be BLS or ALS. And because we don't have that unit, instead of tying up another ALS unit, we just BLS it. So we'd gain some revenue from those calls. But right now, we actually bill at the ALS level right now if we get that intercept. And then we pay the intercept a flat fee, which is halfway down in the expense line, the paramedic expense line, which is budgeted at 22.5 for next year. So that's the very brief financial summary. Service wise, it's just not something that we can pull off right now because of the EMS staffing levels in the state. I mean, we're we're having a heck of a time staffing it at the BLS level right now. Our applications are down 80% from where they were 3 years ago. So for us to take on to try to get paramedics, we just don't think we could do it.
Zach, could you just
A lot of people ask about that. What's that?
Could you just, for everybody's benefit, describe the difference between ALS and BLS?
Yeah. So the paramedics, which is ALS, can do a few more things that we can't do. There's certain medications that they can give that we can't, and they can do 12 lead EKGs, and they can intubate people with a breathing tube. So it's just a higher skill level. So.
Okay, great, thanks.
But it sounds like you would do it if you could get the people.
If we could get the people and if it made financial sense to the town. And the reason I say that, Jane, is because that's out of every question that I get asked about the fire department, that's the number one question I get from the people that live in town is why don't we have that? And, there are a few, like I said, a few reasons, and it comes up quite a bit. Or, we'll be at a medical call And our ambulance is there. Sometimes we're there for 10 minutes or 15 minutes before the paramedics show up. And you get the people that say, hey, why is there another ambulance here? You know, and it comes up quite a bit. But, you know, we actually have 9 paramedics that already work here. But we would need north of 15 to pull it off. But like I said, I get that question quite a bit. So.
What's the level of service in some of the surrounding towns?
So everybody around us is ALS with the exception of Dover and Holliston. Holliston, though, I believe is going towards the ALS level.
Okay.
So. Millis and Medfield just made the jump, I think 5 years ago. So.
What other questions for Zach?
I have a quick question. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Nora. Go ahead.
All right, so there's revenue generation with the ambulances. I get that. I've talked about that with Zach before. But why don't and sorry, forgive me for not bringing this up earlier, but why don't we have revenue generation for police tickets? And I think that I had asked that at a capital budget meeting with the chief before. I'm just curious, and I think it's a different section. But I would, for police tickets, not that I'm looking for trouble, but.
Nora, police tickets go into the general fund. We do have a line item in the general fund for revenue, and it just goes into the general fund. It's not a revolving fund. It doesn't go back to the police department. It goes into the general fund.
Thanks, Deb.
And just to let you know, the fire side of the budget brings in about $20,000 for your smoke and CO inspections when you sell a house, stuff like that.
Right.
But that goes into the general fund too. So.
Is there a reason for that it's not kind of accounted for? Because that's something that for example, the smoke CO certificates, they're what, like $60 a pop for every sale, right? So that's not, well, anyway, I guess that's just the accounting piece of it, but to me, it would be interesting.
It does, Nora, it does appear on the budget model. It's just, I think it's, I don't remember the name of it, but it's something like, you know, other amounts to be raised or something like that. It's just essentially all of those various fees that people get. I mean, same thing really with like the building inspector, right? I mean, we see the building inspector's budget and it's, you know, X amount, but then he's like, I mean, his department brings in, you know, twice as much money as its expenses, but we don't see
Right.
that because it just goes into the general fund. It is accounted for in the budget. It's just not broken down by each department and what each department brought in as revenue. So it is, again, I don't remember the exact name of the category that it's in, but on the budget. Yeah, go ahead, Deb.
Oh, I was going to say it's called estimated revenue. I think on the budget models like EST Rev or something like that. And it goes through and it has the actual numbers in there and what the revenue numbers are. It might be consolidated, so you're not going to see, you know, police tickets or fire permits or stuff like that. But those numbers all that are in that budget model reflect all the money that goes into the general revenue.
Is there any reason why we couldn't break it out? I just think it would be interesting.
Well, I mean, I can get you those numbers. It's not reflected on each of the individual budgets because all these budgets are part of the general fund, except for ambulance is a revolving fund, and revolving funds are set up just to, you know, you have to vote at town meeting to have a revolving fund where there's revenue to offset expenses specifically.
All right, thank you very much for.
And I think maybe there's also just a sense in which, you know, municipal budgeting is a bit different than for-profit budgeting, where one would absolutely be thinking about, here's an activity that's generating revenue, here are the expenses associated with that. Let's keep those tightly together to track. And for municipal departments, that I think that's just not the way we think about what the fire department is doing and what their core mission is. So I don't know if that means the accounting is done in the best way possible, but I think that's part of why the accounting is done the way it is. But I think it sounds like, Nora, if Deb could break out some of those numbers, that would be of interest to just see what they are, right?
Yeah, I can definitely do that.
Okay, great. That'd be terrific.
Deb, thank you very much.
Oh, no problem.
Anybody else on this? Zach, do you want to jump to capital?
Yeah, that'd be great. I have a very short slideshow I'm going to share if you don't mind.
Oh, perfect. Go ahead then. I won't share what I think yours will be better.
Oh, the numbers are all in there. So
It's always better with pictures.
pictures are good. Yeah. Can you see that?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So we're looking to replace the officer in charge car, not to be confused with the command vehicle that was purchased a couple years ago. So we're looking to replace it's a 2016 Explorer. It's used by the on-call officer in charge. So this car is shared by about 10 people. It's a former police cruiser. It's got over 105,000 miles, and it has several mechanical and functional issues. Let me get into the functional now. One of the big things that we're looking to do with the new vehicle is to install what's called a gear clear system. So cancer in the fire service is rampant, whether you're in a small town or a city. Firefighters are regularly exposed to carcinogens. In fact, the World Health Organization actually declared firefighting in general as a class 1 carcinogen 6 months ago. And the majority of our exposures are from our gear and how they're cleaned and how they're stored. Our biggest exposure in the fire department right now that we are not controlling is the gear storage in the officer in charge vehicle. There's gear sitting in it 24/7. It's driven by our lieutenants. Our lieutenants typically get dirtier at fires than I do because they're typically in the building. Unfortunately, I have to stand outside of the building usually. And therefore, this car is one of our big exposure points. So we're looking to have that system installed. Another issue is the vehicle we're replacing. We have one of those computers I was talking about from the dispatch system. We installed it, and the power of that vehicle, and it's not just the battery, there are other issues. It won't support it. Every time we go to start the car with that computer in it, it dies. Then the other functional issues we have are the storage of all the equipment that we carry in the vehicle, which are listed below. This car carries a lot. It's a first response vehicle for the officers. So typically what will happen is if you have a basic emergency in town, whether it's a medical or your fire alarms going off, this vehicle very well might be the first one there. And that's why the officers carry the different things that they carry to maybe try to help mitigate something. But depending on where the call is, they might be there before the ambulance. So they have medical equipment. That's just one example. As far as the cost, our request is $55,432. That includes $40,000 and change for the vehicle itself, $8,000 and change for the upfit, which includes like the emergency lighting package and the sirens and all that comes with it. And then about $7,000 for that gear clear storage system, which brings us to the 55,000 number. As far as we've gotten some grant funding for this vehicle, we got that new computer, the mobile data terminal, which was for a little over $5,800. We've already gotten ordered through a grant 2 mobile radios at a cost of a little over $10,000 for this vehicle, and then $5,400 or so for a spare portable radio for this vehicle, which totals a little over $21,000 in grant funding for this one. I can stop sharing my screen and we can talk about it.
All right. So questions for Zach on any of that?
Zach, is the gear clear system vetted, well vetted? It does what it's supposed to do?
Yeah, so one of our neighbors has it. The Holliston chief has it, and it's worked quite well for him. And what that does is it's a sealed cabinet. And they actually install a small ventilation system in the vehicle. So it takes the carcinogens in that compartment and it sends them outside the car. Because right now the gear sits in that car and it basically off gases whenever the sun hits that vehicle. So that could
then
still
is
happen
there,
with the new vehicle, but it would be contained.
is there an offline treatment for the gear afterwards?
So when we have a fire, we wash the gear, takes out some of the contaminants, not all of them. We also get our gear professionally cleaned from an outside vendor once a year, which helps us meet the NFPA standard for cleaning the gear. There's also some other benefits to that. They inspect the gear and they repair it at the same time. So we do get some relief from that, but not fully. Our gear also contains PFAS in it. There's not a lot we can do about that. So there is a little bit of an exposure issue there. There's some class action lawsuits regarding that against the manufacturers, and that issue's gone before Congress. But the good thing for us is that system will contain all of that in that compartment in the car.
Okay, I understood. So it sounds like there's really no chemical interactions here. It's really just about containing the gear, and so you're not exposed to whatever is on the gear while you're driving the car.
Yeah, and again,
Okay,
because
got
the
it.
gear sits in that vehicle, whoever's the officer in charge has the gear in the vehicle. So there's gear in the vehicle 24/7. Unless I'm the officer in charge, like 2 hours every day, and then every third weekend for the day. So if I'm the officer in charge, there won't be gear in that vehicle, but there typically is 24/7.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Zach, what about the gear that's just stored in the station?
So it's not as much of a problem. It's a bit of a problem, but it's not as bad. The issue with these vehicles is there's fabric in them, the ceilings, the floors, the seats, and it's such a tight area that those things become contaminated themselves. The other issue with the car is as soon as it gets any sunlight and warms up, that's when the gear really off gases contaminants, where you don't really have that in the station as much. And luckily the station, it's a larger space, obviously, and it gets more airflow and things like that. But it is definitely less of an exposure than that vehicle.
All right, thanks. Anybody else with questions? All right, I think we're good. Thank you, Zach. Really appreciate it.
Great. No, thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.
All right. All right, so we now it's going to get a little bit more complicated. We're going to go to cover debt service, OPEB, and benefits. I don't know if Deb and Jeremy want to walk us through the debt service, or I'm happy to share the latest numbers. But the person who will really have answers to all those questions is Heidi, who, as I mentioned before, couldn't be here. Deb, Jeremy, did you want to talk about those? Or should we just defer until a time when Heidi can join in?
Jeremy, I don't know if you can talk to the numbers. I don't think I really can talk to them. I know Heidi, puts in the numbers based on the history as far as the principal and the interest. She always has a concern about doing, interest on the new items. I really didn't talk to her about how she came up with her numbers, so I can't really speak to it.
Okay. And I didn't get a chance to either. So maybe unless somebody has a particular question on the debt service, why don't we defer that and wait till Heidi's here, because we'll have, I think, a more informed conversation about that. So that being said, let me bring up, let's see, let me bring up benefits next.
Quick question while you're doing that. Peter, did I hear you correctly earlier that Capital has approved the officer in charge? Is that correct?
Police, fire, and the school systems, their capital requests were approved last night. So Zach's vehicle, the two for hybrid and electric vehicle for police, and then a number of items for the Sherborn School, Pine Hill, and then the regional school.
Okay, thank
Yes, they were all approved.
Thank you.
Deb, were you going to talk about benefits?
Yeah, I can go ahead and do that. So, oh, you know what? My computer is just coming back and I'm going to sign on as myself on my computer and get rid of the phone here. Hold on just a sec.
Perfect.
Recording.
Sorry about that. I think the echo should be gone now.
Yep, it's good.
And yeah, there we go. So anyway, the Middlesex County retirement is a number that they give us. So the number that's in there for the budget request is just a given number by Middlesex County. The workers' comp, we received an estimate from Maya. That's pretty much the same as our budget for this year. They didn't think there would be an increase in that. The unemployment, it's going to be much higher. Our run rate for this year is already at 11,000. So I know that we're going to be over 23. We had a couple claims from some school teachers. So that's going to be higher. So I think for fiscal year 24, I more or less put in what the average is for the last 3 years. And, you know, that's kind of hit or miss. You never know. The health insurance, that's the one where I initially estimated 9% because they gave us a ballpark between 1 and 10 and just being conservative. But then when I talked to Carrie today, it's going to be more like 1%, which should save us about $130,000. And the life insurance, the Medicare, and the professional services, I just kept flat to the budget.
Is the Middlesex County line final now, or is that still an estimate to be updated sometime later in the year?
That one is final. They gave that to us already.
Questions on benefits piece?
Ooh, just curious, the Middlesex County, the retirement, I know you said that's just a number they provide to us, but what would drive that increase of 10%?
That's really for retirement. We're trying to catch up where we're really underfunded in retirement. So that is just the continuously increase to try to fund the retirement. And it's just not us. I mean, it's the whole state of Massachusetts, the whole county.
And
But go ahead. Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
no, I was just trying to think through how that relates to the OPEB piece that we're going to talk about in a second.
Well, the OPEB piece is the piece that we continue to fund, and the Middlesex County it's all the pieces going together. We're not required as a community to do that OPEB piece, but we continue to do that just to show good faith. And so that eventually we will be funded.
And picking up on Wasim's question, the 10% here reflects the Middlesex County's efforts to get caught up and get their piece of the whole retirement and benefits package more
Yes.
fully funded.
Yeah, and this part is required.
Yeah, yeah. Wasim, did you have a further question?
No. It was just really try to understand why that increase, but it sounds like, okay, you clarified it. Thank you. Thank you.
What else on this? All right. And just briefly then, let me pop up the reserve fund and OPEB numbers. Okay, here we are.
We have been keeping these stable for the last several years. The OPEB has been the $100,000 where we funded out of the general fund. And then we also use free cash to fund another 100,000. So every year we continue to fund 200,000. And the reserve fund again has been $300,000 for the last several years. Years ago, we used to use it truly for more unexpected expenses during the course of the year. And even last year, we used like 80,000 of it during the course of the year when David retired, or David left and we had to pay him vacation and some other things. But the last several years, we've kind of been keeping it for unexpected legal fees.
All right, thanks. Anybody with questions on this piece?
We haven't used anything in the reserve fund this year, have we?
No, we have not. I mean, the only time that we really use it during the course of the year is if a department becomes underfunded. And by law, they can't be underfunded until the last 2 months of the year. So, let's say something truly unexpected would happen to one of the departments, and then we would have to do a reserve fund request and tap into that. And that's what happened last year with the town and the select board budget.
Okay, Jane, go ahead.
Deb, you mentioned that in recent years, that reserve fund has been used to pay for unexpected legal expenses. Do we know yet whether it's likely that that will be the case again this year?
We're running a lot lower than we have been. But that's really not something I can speak to because I'm not really sure exactly all the legal matters that are out there. But it is running much lower than it has been the last couple of years.
The main reason I'm curious about that is that the schools have a very large deficit on their out-of-district expenses.
Mhm.
They're going to need a total of about 300. They're projecting a total of about $357,000. 100,000 of which could potentially come out of the SPED stabilization fund. That still leaves another 257. So, that reserve fund, if it's still there, could potentially be used for that purpose. But so that's why I was curious as to whether we were expecting it to be used for other things.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely could come out of there. And like I said, it's really too early to tell.
Then I don't know if this is something that's appropriate to discuss now, Dan, but if we're on the topic of what we're going to put into sort of reserve funds, if you will, at some point, I suppose we will need to discuss if we think we are going to use the SPED stabilization fund to pay some of those extra costs. Do we think that we would want to replenish that in some way? And if so, would it be, for the full amount or would it be for a partial amount?
Right. Yeah, okay. We'll have to we're talking reserve funds. If anybody has a view on that, Jane, if you have a view on that one way or another, if others do, would be good to hear that. We can also schedule as we get closer to the public hearing and making decisions about what's going to get funded where. It could also bring that back at that point.
How much is
Yeah.
in the sped stabilization fund currently?
About 100.
It's 100.
Oh.
Is that right, Deb? 100,000?
Yeah, it's like 108,000. Yeah.
Okay.
And Jane, do you know when the schools would need these additional funds? Is there a deadline?
I don't know, Mike, I wasn't quite sure. At my understanding, we asked that question last night of Don. I think the answer was basically just that it has to be taken care of by the end of the fiscal year. It didn't sound
Okay.
like they needed that money imminently. Was that your interpretation as well, Mike?
Yeah, yeah, I just, it sounded like it was by the end of the school year. The question was just being asked of us, like what timing would make sense. So I think, yeah, it's kind of in our court in terms of how to deal with it.
I mean, end of the school year is different from end of the fiscal year though, right? I mean, because if it's something that we could wait until the end of your transfers to figure out, okay, well, exactly how much is needed and how much, turn back do we have from various departments? And then, at that point, I mean, who, right? It's unexpected, right? So I don't know between now and July 1, whether somebody's going to need to dip into the reserve fund. So I'm like, if we can actually just wait till the actual end of your transfers, then that, to me, that would make a lot more sense than trying to decide right now what to do with it. But I guess if we want to use money from the sped stabilization, that decision has to be made at town meeting, right?
It does. It has to be voted at town meeting.
As well as any replenishment we might do, right, Deb?
Yeah.
Right. Right.
But we could, for example, essentially we could say, all right, well, if we were to, I was going to say, if we decided to use the 100,000 in the stabilization and then replenish another 100,000, essentially we would be saying we're using $100,000 of free cash to offset the schools, right?
Right.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we did have a healthy free cash number this year. We had 2.7 million of free cash and our goal, based on the fiscal policy, is to keep a balance of free cash at about 5%, which in total would be $1.7 million. So we have about $1 million of leeway that we could use, if we want to stick with our fiscal policy. But, in that is definitely, the OPEB and, supplementals. And if we want to add to our general stabilization, if we want to fund any capital items. So there's a lot of things that $1 million could be used for.
When I said earlier that I thought there'd be draws on free cash, I was imagining that a significant part of covering this school need would end up coming from free cash one way or another. Although, if there were reserve funds available, if we could wait until later and then kind of see what's what, there might be other options. But when I had said that earlier, that was what I had in the back of my mind.
May I ask, what is SPED?
Special education.
Sorry, say that again, please.
Special education.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Yeah, we at some point in the past stashed $100,000 in there and thought that would cover any unexpected circumstances. And as Jane and Mike mentioned, this year's unexpected circumstances more than overwhelmed that $100,000.
But can you use the money from special education fund to cover other non-special education
Yes,
needs?
well, in particular, this excess need for funds is related to special education. So we could.
Oh, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's specifically related to special ed costs for out of district students being greater than, you know, what was anticipated when the budget was put together last year.
Thank you.
So this is a good, Deb, unless you had more you wanted to share, people had more questions. This is, I think, a good segue to, with big thanks to Jane and Mike for kind of getting to the school committee meeting last night and pulling together some kind of high level school budget info to share with all of us. Let's get to that in a second. And of course, the intent of this is next week we have our joint meeting with Dover Warrant and both of the school committees. I'll just mention setup. We're starting at 6:30 next Wednesday. It's in person at I mentioned this before, but at the Dover Sherborn Middle School Library. And it turns out we will have the Sherborn. So we'll start at 6:30 and do the region. And when that's done, we will pivot and do the Sherborn schools. And that's all sorted out with Dawn and everyone on the school committees. And I think the expectation is spend an hour and a half on the region and think that we'd be starting the Pine Hill piece around 8 o'clock or so, obviously flexible depending on how things go. But that was Dawn's expectation of how that would go. Steve, quick question for you. Is this all posted as one giant meeting or do we need to post for 2 meetings? Do you recall?
You have to post for 2 meetings.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was afraid that would be the answer, but I figured I better find out now rather than next Tuesday or something. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So with that set up, the idea of taking some time for Jane and Mike to walk us through this is with a little more background and a chance for us to talk about some of these issues here and now, hoping that makes our conversation next week maybe a little, well-directed and well-focused. So Jane, Mike, however you want to organize this, it's all yours.
So Mike, do you want to, I think Mike's going to talk about Pine Hill and I'm going to talk about the region. And Mike, do you want to go first or want me to, or what do you want to?
I can start it off. That's fine. So as has been mentioned, there's certainly increases with the school and not insignificant. The biggest challenge I think that has been facing this really both of the schools is the ongoing union contract negotiations, which unfortunately through some specifics about how everything is set up administratively and how I guess there were many negotiations that were ongoing. They couldn't really start until just recently, so the whole process is a little bit delayed, and the expectation is that it will not be finalized until pretty close to the public hearing on March 18th. So we will be pretty close to that meeting before we have real better numbers. So right now we're left with best estimates, and there's a lot of challenges kind of facing the school in terms of trying to come up with clear numbers, firm numbers. So with that said, on the Sherborn side, on the Pine Hill side, as was just mentioned, the out of district placements with special education are not only an increase for this current year, but also for next year, which is an increase, projected increase of in between about 57%, and that's about $330,000. So that's obviously a significant adjustment to the budget from the 2023 budget to the 2024 budget. Um, There also, there's some other items like the addition of some staff. There's 2 full-time employees that were brought on. And so there's some increases there. But again, the largest factors, the largest variables with the school budget is related to the contract negotiations and on the Sherborn side, the out of office or out of district placements. And then we also mentioned the we just discussed all the deficit with the 357,000. Those are kind of the high level main points that I have. I mean, there's obviously more, but those are kind of the basics.
And the 357 is coming from Pine Hill students.
Yes.
Yeah. Nora, go ahead. You're muted.
I got that. Can they, for the out of district students, are they allowed to say how many, and has the cost gone up per student significantly? Just curious, how many students are they placing out? And then are the costs going up on those out of per student?
I believe there were a couple of students, two or three where the cost was just significant. And these were, as was mentioned before, totally unforeseen new situations that had a significant cost. The good news is, these are, these children do eventually age out, but there was some changes with transportation costs, because there's also transportation
Okay.
costs that have to be factored in. But I believe, I don't know if I fully followed the math that was being thrown at us last night, but there was a kind of an offsetting of a reduction in the miles, but also an increase in the cost, which basically shook out to net zero, or close there too. So yeah,
Right.
I mean, that's
It is what it is. I know it is what it is. I was just curious.
yeah.
Thank you.
Mike, are there any particular issues that you think we ought to raise next week? Or is it more in the realm of it is what it is, and subject to the contract negotiations, just hard to.
That's really the hard thing, and not only is that I think that there's a ripple effect within the budget, where that's such a high priced item that is an unknown variable, that it kind of makes it hard for the school board to really be confident about other numbers potentially, because I think there's the potential that if there's a significant increase with the salaries, or with some aspect of the negotiations, then that would other numbers would have to change, and kind of vice versa. So I don't know if this is a helpful thing that I'm saying, but basically I think it is just a challenge where the lion's share of the budget is an unknown, that it just at the end of the day, it will be a little bit of it is what it is, and probably a little bit of a last minute shifting of some funds in order to make the budget work.
Do you happen to recall if outside of the salary piece, how close the budget is to our guidance, to flat budget guidance?
I don't recall what the
yeah. Okay. I mean, I can look as well. I don't remember what the numbers are either.
And certainly again on the Pine Hill side, the biggest increase was the placements.
Yeah, of course.
And there are no special grants or anything like that that people can have access to for education grants, special ed?
I mean, not that I know of. I mean, Jane, I don't know if you're aware of something, but
Well, if you're talking specifically on the out of district, Nora, I mean, that's mainly what the circuit breaker funds are for. And, those are state funds that we get every year. And I guess if you want to call it good news, the good news is that the amount of money that we get from circuit breaker is based on what our costs were for the prior year. So we will get more circuit breaker money next year because of the high costs we had this year, but that doesn't help us,
For this year.
for
Okay, thank
this
you.
fiscal year.
Thank you.
Anybody else with anything on Pine Hill to think about before next week, before we shift to the region? Peter, go ahead.
I just had a question. Do they mention standardized test scores, like performance?
There was some discussion, it might have been at the first or second school committee meeting of the year when the MCAS scores came out. Pine Hill scores were not good, frankly, they just weren't. And if I recall, and Mike, help me out here if I'm misremembering, but I do recall there was some discussion about the fact that, especially at the elementary level, MCAS scores really don't tell the whole story, and that there was a lot of focus on just helping these kids who had been through a difficult time with COVID, getting back on track with their social and emotional skills, and just sort of getting back on track. So the high school numbers were a lot better, and so I think the general feeling was that as long as we kind of get it right by the time they get to high school, that's not bad. But the numbers were not good for Pine Hill this year.
Thank you.
All right, Jane, you want to talk a little bit about the region?
Yeah, I mean, the region, same story. There's just a big question mark because of the contract situation. Their overall expenses are actually only up by 3.85%, which is not huge, especially when you figure that whatever the salary increases are, we recommended 4.5 this year. So, and 80% of their budget is salaries. So 3.85% is actually not a huge increase overall, given that they have to factor in, for salary increase. But what is really hurting us in Sherborn this year is that the percentage of students, the ratio of how much of the total we have to pay has gone up by 1.25%, because we have more kids relative to Dover in the system this year. And that is about $150,000 that, there's really nothing we can do about that. There was not, there weren't, last year there were several new personnel that they wanted to add. There were things that we could have a bunch of discussion about. There really aren't any at the region this year. There really aren't any big ads that they want to do that we might have a discussion about. I mean, they're adding a literacy specialist. They have to add an athletic trainer, but that athletic trainer was partially getting paid. They had to have one last year. They were paying a third party through consulting. So the amount of money they're paying for the full-time trainer now is not, a lot of that was already included last year in the consulting arrangements that they were doing. And I guess that's mandated by the state that they have to have a trainer, available for the sports on site at the sports events. Other than that, there's not really, any big item that they're looking to. I mean, they have a capital request of about 1.3 million, most of which is for rooftop air handling units. But in the operating budget, there was not a real big, anything really big that was going up. It's mainly hurting us because of our rate, of the ratio changing. So, what do we do about, what can we do in terms of discussions with them? Maybe that we just have to say, hey, it's a tough year, and it's even tougher for us because of what's happened with the ratio of students. And so we're just really looking for some relief. I mean, Dawn, she did say that there is going to be a 1 percentage point decrease in the Norfolk County retirement fees. We haven't seen that reflected in the budget yet, so that will be coming through. She did mention that they're willing. Oh, actually, this is something that because the out of district expenses come through the Pine Hill budget, even if it's students who are at the region who are affected. So, and one thing that is perennially an issue is that they typically budget assuming about 60% reimbursement on circuit breaker funds, but we get typically about 75% back. And also now the state is paying reimbursement for transportation, whereas the state didn't used to pay reimbursement for transportation, and they have not yet factored that transportation money into the budget. Now, Dawn this happened last year, and she did factor in version 2 of the budget, which we haven't seen yet. That's another thing, because of the delays with the contracts. Usually version 2 comes out in February. It did not come out in February. Version 2, as Mike said, is not going to come out until basically right before our public hearing. And the contract may not even be finalized then. They'll just have to go with their place marker numbers if they haven't finalized the contract at that point. But so there are a lot of unknowns, but we do know that 1% will go down on the Norfolk County retirement. We do know that Dawn said she was prepared to increase by $20,000 the assumption on the circuit breaker reimbursement. That's certainly not anything close from 60 to 75%. So, I mean, we often push and ask for her to please budget for a higher assumption on the reimbursement percentage. The problem with asking for that this year is that, we had a very real problem and we really needed the money. So it's kind of hard to say, well, you don't need to worry about, extra OOD costs when we just had huge extra OOD costs. So I don't know. That's something that we often ask for and potentially could ask for again. But, it may just be that we have to just trust. I mean, she did, there are always levers that they can pull. And we do our best to try to figure out where those levels are, but we don't always know. So levers are, but we don't always know. So, if we do just say it's a tough year, Sherborn's really getting hit this year on the ratio, please, you got to find a way to give us some relief. My expectation is that she probably would. In fact, Mike, wouldn't you say she pretty much telegraphed? I mean, last night, one of the school committee members last night did ask, what did we have to trade off? What did we have to leave out in this budget? And she said, well, we don't really leave things out until and unless, the towns tell us that we have to. And then, we see what we have to do. So that to me suggested that there is some room potentially, if we do just say, tough year, we need help. But in terms of, I don't know, Mike, do you disagree? It just doesn't seem like there's a lot of specific line items that we could say, oh, you could really cut back there, or you could really cut back there.
Yeah, I agree. I did not see, or I haven't really heard any, excess spending or I mean, not any, but I mean, there's nothing really jumps out to me right now as something where I would say, we should push back on X, Y, or Z. It's a tough year, and it's delicate with the union negotiations, because while that is an open item, I think it's hard to negotiate and insist on moving or decreasing funds within the budget when, in fairness, she doesn't really know what what she has or what she doesn't have.
Right.
So it's a challenge.
Yeah, one potential question we could ask, and Mike and Steve and Dan, you were all there when we had the original conversation with Dawn about the budget generally. And I do remember discussion about this. I don't remember the specifics. I know last night she reiterated that at Pine Hill, they really had not used their ESSER money, which is the federal COVID related money. They really had not used that for things that were going to have to get baked into the budget in the future, that they had used it mainly, for one-time expenses that they wanted to cover. But I do recall that at the region, I don't think it's quite the same story at the region. I think there was, she mentioned, I think it's the Panorama database maybe was one of the things or the Panorama program was one of the things that is currently being covered by ESSER funds that I think they're planning on including in the budget next year. So maybe the three of you are clearer than I am on exactly what is getting added to the budget that was previously covered by ESSER, but maybe one question could be, what's working its way into the budget that didn't used to be there, that is now there because it could be because of ESSER, and do we really need to include all of that going forward? We did have some discussion about that, and she seemed to have, very good answers for why, yes, it did need to be there. I just don't remember all the specifics. Maybe you guys do.
Yeah, I don't remember the specifics, but the gist that I got was that whatever it was that they were adding, that software, it's not like it was a luxury item that they maybe didn't need and then just bought it because they had the ESSER funds. I think it was more something that they were already planning on transitioning to, and the ESSER funding essentially just allowed them to move the timeline up on it. She went into a discussion of like what it does and the advantages that it provided, and I'm not an education person, so it was over my head, but it sounded good, whatever she said. but again, it seemed more like this was something that they were going to do anyways, and it's just that the funding allowed them to do it probably a year sooner than they would have.
I had a similar recollection. All right. So anything else on this, Jane or Mike, that you wanted us to talk about, or anybody else with questions or comments? So that was super helpful for me just to lay out the basics, and I think it gives us kind of a direction to go with our conversation. I will plan this week on touching base with the chair of Dover Warrant and share some of what we just talked about with her, and see where they are, and see if they are hopefully in a similar place to where we are, so that maybe there could be a kind of consistent message. All right. Well, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Jane. That was very helpful. Really appreciate your pulling that together and doing that. All right. So last.
May I just ask one very quick question?
Yes. Go ahead.
Mike, when you said the projected increase, did I get that correct? 57%?
Yeah, I closed it, but yes, I think that was it.
Okay, and that is the same number as the 357,000 that was mentioned earlier. Is that the same?
No, so the 357 is how far they are underfunded this current year. The 57% is the increase for 2024.
And that's the increase from budgeted FY23, which was insufficient to what they expect for FY24.
Right, and that's the line item for the out of
right
placements.
Right.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Great. So our last order of business, and everybody's favorite, is to look at minutes. So let me pop those up. And here they are. Thanks to Natalie for pulling these together. I think looks like she dropped it. Oh, no, she's here. Okay, great. So I'll do the usual thing, scroll through these. Please jump in with Any corrections or comments?
I'll just say apologies for not attending last week. I got sick and just didn't even get out of bed to send a note. So sorry.
Ah, sorry you weren't doing well. Anybody have any changes or corrections, additions, deletions? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes as shown on screen.
So moved.
Thanks, Steve. Second,
Second,
and roll call. Wasim.
I'll just abstain.
Okay. Nora,
I'll abstain. I wasn't here.
Mike,
Aye.
Jane,
aye.
Natalie,
Aye.
Steve,
Aye.
and I'm as well. So we're 5 in favor, 0 opposed, 2 abstain. The abstentions are fine. I think the rules are you may vote on minutes, even if you weren't at the meeting, but totally fine, totally fine too.
Dan, can I vote?
Oh, I'm sorry, Peter. Yes, please. Please.
Aye.
Vote. Yes, thank you. Sorry. That's actually better. It gets us 6-0. I apparently I can't count. I don't know. I was worked. Whatever. Sorry, I just messed up.
That's all right.
Okay, thank you for that.
Peter, can I just ask a quick question about next week? I have it 6:30. Where is it going to be?
In the middle school library.
Got it. And Peter, are we meeting for capital next Tuesday on Valentine's Day? Or no? Peloton?
Yes,
Okay, that's
yes.
fine. Fine with me. Great. Thank you.
Valentine's Day. That's great time to have a capital budget meeting.
Of course.
All right, so I think we are set. Unless somebody has something else, I would be happy to hear a motion to adjourn.
I
I
move to adjourn.
motion second.
You're too late.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Let's do a roll call. Peter, let's start with you this time so I don't forget.
Aye.
Natalie,
Aye.
Steve,
Aye.
Jane,
Aye.
Mike,
Aye.
Nora,
Bye.
and I am I as well. So we are adjourned at 9:32. Thanks
This
very
time,
much,
this time you forgot me.
I did. What do you know, Wasim? Yeah. You know, I counted you as an I. You know, the trouble. So here's my problem. When I'm doing screen share, I'm sure there's a way I can fix this. When I'm doing screen share, I get a weird format of all of our faces, and then I just get messed up. So sorry about that. Apologies for missing. Thank you for jumping in and fixing that for me. All right, so we are done. Thanks very much, everybody. See you next Wednesday at 6:30 at the middle school.
Okay, have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you.